Thank you very much. So if I try and share my screen, that should be it. Somebody shout if they can't see, but that should be visible to everybody. Okay, the medicinal uses of emeralds in history. Well, diamonds might be a girl's best friend, but emeralds surely have to be part of the girl's close friendship group. Who cannot be entranced really by the beautiful green color of this precious stone, sought after through history for mounting as a jewel. So a few emerald-rich jewels just to water your appetite. Well, to modernize the use of precious and semi-precious stones in medicine seems to be quite strange. You'd hardly expect to be able to get a prescription for emerald, diamond or sapphire from Boots or Superdrug, but lithotherapy, the medicinal uses of rocks, minerals and fossils, has a long and well-established pedigree. Precious and semi-precious stones, probably by virtue of their exoticism, rarity, and some of their mineralogical characteristics, especially their hardness and color and so on, were often given particularly high status as therapeutic agents. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century Benedictine abbess, who was wonderfully gifted composer, poet, writer, and philosopher from Germany, had strong, fairly unique opinions about the origins of the therapeutic qualities in precious stones. They fit in well with her theology. She was one of a very select band of medieval female authors and claimed to receive her medical knowledge by direct revelation from God. And in her Causae et Curae, Causes and Remedies, she expresses her opinions about precious stones. She wrote, "The devil abhors, detests and disdains precious stones. This is because he remembers that their beauty was manifest in him before he fell from the glory of God that God had given him. And because some precious stones are engendered from fire, in which he receives his punishment. By the will of God, the devil was vanquished by the fire into which he fell, just as he is vanquished by the fire of the Holy Spirit when humans are snatched from his jaws by the first breath of the Holy Spirit." So precious stones expose a weakness in the devil's makeup. And when applied to the people whom he persecutes with illness and disease, she thought they would overcome his actions. Well, her ideas for the origins of the therapeutic qualities of precious stones are quite novel as well. She envisaged a sun-heated mountain in the east, perhaps the Garden of Eden, interacting with rising river waters to produce a froth, which, when the waters receded, dried and hardened into stone. And then she wrote that they take their colors and powers in accordance with the time of day and the temperature. Drying and hardening, they become precious stones and fall into the sand, just like flaking fish scales. And then they were washed into other countries. She applied this idea to the emerald specifically, indicating that it grew in the early morning at sunrise, when, and I quote, "the natural vigor of the earth and grasses is especially lively, the air still cold and the sun hot." She concludes that the emerald is powerful against all human weakness and sickness, since the sun readies it and since all its matter is of the vitality of the air. The emerald interacts positively with the patient's condition by bringing about physiological change through its heating action, utilizing the stored energy which it has received from its birth by solar heating. And this process is illustrated by reference to the remedial action of emerald when placed in the mouth of sufferers from plague and other ailments. She wrote, "Whence one who ails in his heart, stomach or side should have an emerald with him. It'll heat up his flesh, making him better. And if this person is so beset by pestilence, which cannot constrain their commotions, he should place an emerald in his mouth. So it becomes wet from his saliva. The saliva heats up from the stone, and he should repeatedly place it on and take it from his body. The sudden pestilential attacks will cease without a doubt." So Hildegard of Bingen esteemed precious stones heavily in terms of their therapeutic qualities. It's also worth quoting from Ivan the Terrible. He wrote, "All these precious stones are God's wonderful gifts, secrets in nature, and yet he reveals them to man's use and contemplation as friends to grace and virtue and enemies to vice." So they really did seem to be God-given vessels for therapeutic power. And just finally, as an introduction, Giulio de Giuliano de' Medici was elected Pope in 1523, but was rather indecisive. And his final illness saw him being treated with precious stones. In fact, 40,000 ducats worth, a price comparable to the ransom of a small country. It was all to no avail, of course. And however, one of his last acts on this earth before his death was to order Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. So I suppose we ought to be grateful to him for something. So unlikely as it might seem, precious stones occupied a significant place in the armory of the apothecary and were revered for their therapeutic potential over a span of almost 2 millennia. The wide range of materials used in this way is illustrated by the list of ingredients added to restorative sick dishes by Monsieur Chicaud, who was the early 15th century master chef to Amadeus VII, Duke of Savoy, who had claims to the papacy as Felix V. He added to these soups gold coins, pearls, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, turquoise, emerald, coral, amber, jasper, jacinth, onyx, crystal, chalcedony, sardonyx, chrysolite, beryl, topaz, chrysoprase, and amethyst. All things that were down to strengthen and ensure the health of those who received it. So what about emeralds in particular? Emeralds belong to the beryl group of complex ring silicates, and beryllium is only the 98th most abundant element in the Earth's crust. The green color is due to minor amounts of chromium and or vanadium, and those elements in turn are 21st and 20th in terms of abundance. So the relative rarity of these elements means that the geological circumstances for the formation of emeralds are also quite specific, and it means to say that there's only a few sources worldwide. The written history of emeralds can be traced back to the 4th century BC with the writings of Theophrastus, Aristotle's pupil, and then his successor at the Peripatetic school in Athens. His Perilithon, or on stones, provides both the earliest description of the mineral and the first mention of a supposed medicinal property ascribed to it. He wrote it's also good for the eyes, and for this reason people carry seals made of it so as to see better. Pliny, who famously died in the eruption of Vesuvius in AD 79, referred directly to Theophrastus' work in his Natural History, which has got a whole book on stones, an illustration from which you can see on the right. The section on emeralds refers to them as smaragdus and classifies them mostly on the basis of locality. The question arises as to whether all smaragdus are actually emeralds. And the answer is that smaragdus clearly does embrace emeralds, but that the term also seems to embrace a variety of other green stones. And it's clear from Pliny's writings that the term was also used to include malachite, which is a hydrated copper carbonate, praise, a green variety of quartz, and possibly the green variety of the silicate mineral tourmaline known as elbaite. Now, of course, mineralogical knowledge at that time was very limited, and the suspicion that emeralds were closely related to the beryls was only proved experimentally in the 19th century. Well, where does the power of the stone come from? Pliny refers to the intensity of the green color of the stone that doesn't dim in sunlight, but seems to maintain a luminescence all of its own, and the observation that the air above the gem seems to reverberate with power as if signaling the presence of occult virtues held within. And added to this, of course, there was the exotic and costly nature of the gem. Pliny cites 3 main sources of emeralds in the ancient world, and he says that the most important of these, yielding the best quality stones, is Scythia, where mythical griffins guard gold and diamonds washed out of the Altai Mountains from being plundered by a one-eyed race called the Arimaspians. And this struggle is commonly depicted on Greek vases. The tale's taken up by many derivative accounts, and the 13th century book of Sidrach expands the story further. It concludes that the land of Scythia lies so far to the east that it's part of the Garden of Eden, bounded by the 4 rivers that issue from its center, the Tigris, Euphrates, Gershon, and Pison. There was also the idea that the unicorn visited the center of Paradise Terrestri, as it was called, to feed on special herbs, so allowing it to maintain the electropharmic and healing powers in its fabled horn or alicorn. And you can see a unicorn drinking at the stream in Hieronymus Bosch's famous panel of the Garden of Earthly Delights here in the middle picture. Well, a lot of energy was spent by various authors developing maps of the garden and its location based upon the snippets of information given in the book of Genesis. This attempt is by Athanasius Kircher in 1675. I noticed the 4 rivers, which I've encircled in red, and the angels stationed at the 4 points of the compass to exclude members of the banished human race. The lapidary explains that griffins collected precious stones that have been washed out of the Garden of Eden by floodwaters, and having their origin in the presence of God, and of course being cited amongst the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem and used in the breastplate of the high priest, they were clearly invested with divine therapeutic power. There's even one illustration in Vincent de Beauvai's Mirror of History, written around 1254, that shows precious stones tumbling along in the floodwaters while the angel protects the limits of Eden with his flaming sword. You can see them there on the bottom right of the image. Well, the second emerald yielding locality cited by Pliny is Bactria, the area that includes present-day Iran and Afghanistan. Pliny's source is unknown, but the modern commercial exploitation of emeralds has taken place in the Panjshir Valley of the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan, but only since the 19th century. It's generally agreed that the Egyptian deposits mentioned by Pliny account for most of the emeralds entering circulation in classical times, right the way through to the 17th century. Although it's been suggested that the Romans also worked some deposits at Habachtal near Salzburg in Austria. Historical Egyptian emerald mining sites are known from several localities, all within about 15 kilometers of the best known and the most ancient mine at Wadi Sikait in the Eastern Desert. This locality, sometimes referred to as Montana Smaragdus by the Romans, probably began production towards the end of the Ptolemaic period in the 1st century BC, and although it was also actively exploited in Roman and Byzantine times, and production at other sites in the area contained until well into the 16th century. The eastern ranges of the Colombian Andes yielded emeralds to local indigenous peoples in pre-Columbian times, where they were worshipped, widely traded through Mexico and South America, and used ceremonially for personal adornment. In early April 1536, a Spanish military expedition was conducted under the leadership of this gentleman, Conquistador Gonzalo Jimenez de Cazada, into the territory of modern Colombia. And as they traveled south, the Spanish soldiers encountered emeralds in the region, and Quesada ordered his captain to search for the mines. In 1537, the Spaniards took over the operational Chibcha Indian mine near Chivor, using the Indians as an enslaved workforce. And in 1564, the Indians' mine, some 7 kilometers to the west, was forcibly added to the Spaniards' productive emerald holdings. And together, these two mines yielded high-grade gem-quality emeralds, feeding the European and Indian markets through early modern times. And Colombia is still the largest producer of emeralds today. Well, the westward expansion of the Portuguese Empire during the 16th century resulted in the colonization of parts of present-day Brazil, Uruguay, and Venezuela. They sought to emulate the successes of the Spaniards and dispatched several expeditions to search for mineral wealth, particularly in Brazil. But no significant emerald sources were uncovered by their expeditionary programs. But all wasn't lost. The Portuguese excelled at establishing trading routes through their empire, and it wasn't long before an intercontinental system of staging and trading posts was funneling a wide range of trade goods derived from natural resources across the Atlantic into Lisbon. The imported items of trade included a wide range of South American gemstones, of which emeralds must have constituted a significant fraction. Well, the Portuguese presence in India was established several decades before their burgeoning interest in South America, and trade routes back to Portugal were quickly established, and Lisbon rapidly became the expanding import hub for goods. The city hosted an active and diverse collection of jewel processing tradesmen and merchants, and at least partly focused in the lower downtown area of Lisbon. Gems, including emeralds, were actively exported or imported firstly into Lisbon and then exported to Goa, where equally strong jewel processing trades were being developed. And precious stones were ideal items of intercontinental trade because, of course, they have high commercial value, they're easy to transport, and possibly easy to conceal from the authorities and avoid tax revenues. Goa was destined to become a crucial center for gem trading, although the potential for loss on the high seas during times of maritime conflict was high. Well situated in Goa was the merchant and medic Garcia de Horta, who wrote his colloquies or conversations in 1563. He records a lively discussion between himself and Ruano, a new arrival in Goa, with the Portuguese annual fleet from Lisbon. Colloquy 21 records a servant girl interrupting their discussion to announce the arrival of Andrea, a lapidario from Milan, who was located a possible buyer for 2 emeralds in de Orta's possession. And this set Ruana asking questions about the gem. And when asked if gems had a special healing powers, de Orta's position was, well, if they, the healing powers, are not contrary to reason, they may be true. Ruano then raises the question of South American emeralds. A modern doctor, says he, that our emeralds of Peru are of much more use for medicinal purposes. De Orta's riposte was that the imported gems were false, which of course is untrue, and that his guests should be on your guard against them. So de Orta's approach to the question of magico-medicinal properties inherent in precious and semi-precious stones was either to dissimulate or to argue against their existence. He clearly couldn't see much therapeutic value in their use and was reticent to endorse their employment in medical treatments. Well, going back to Pliny, he recorded that the Emperor Nero used to watch the gladiatorial sports through the lens of an emerald. Well, Colombian emeralds were becoming particularly popular amongst Mughal rulers. Here on the left is Shah Jahan, who was responsible for the building of the Taj Mahal, admiring a large specimen. In an interesting side note to this tale, there is a pair of eyeglasses with teardrop-shaped lenses, top right, dated to the 17th century, set in later 19th century diamond-studded frames. They were withdrawn from an auction sale at Sotheby's on the 27th of October last year, having failed to make the £3 million estimate for their sale. Something of a precedent had been set by Charles V of France, in whose treasuries recorded several green berricles or beryls set in frames as spectacles. The owner perhaps was prejudging the style of a later personality famed for his taste in spectacles. Poisoning and the fear of it was a real concern to all members of the society during medieval and early modern times. Depending on geography, there was the threat of being bitten by venomous animals. Rye bread might contain fungal toxins. Well water could be tainted by poisons leached from the rocks or even deliberately poisoned. And for those with assassination in mind, there was a wide variety of relatively easily accessible, highly effective herbal and mineral poisons, including the likes of those here: Nepella, aconite, hemlock, hellebore, realjar and orpiment are 2 ores of arsenic, antimony and litharge. Poorer people were limited to simple talismans and amulets for protection: a dried toad carried in a bag round the neck, quicksilver held in a hazelnut, or a live spider kept in a walnut shell, were all believed to draw poison out of a patient by means of sympathy. Members of the nobility and the papacy, however, were at greater risk of assassination because of the intrigue and internecine fighting and manoeuvring that went on around the centres of power. One pope commissioned a special report on poisons so he could be adequately prepared for any eventuality, while other authors of poison treatises often dedicated their works to their elite patrons. Kitchens were often distantly removed from the banqueting hall, and there was a worrying number of opportunities for food and drink to be sabotaged with poisons. There were logical steps which could be taken to avoid food becoming tainted with poison in the first place, though. Santiago de Pizarro in the 1420s suggested a 6-fold approach in his treatise on poisons, and they included choosing good and trustworthy servants, intercepting would-be poisoners before they could have access to the food, exercising dietary restraint, regarding food with unusual appearance or taste with suspicion, and ingesting preventative drugs before the meal. Some form of detection of any poisons that had been introduced into the food or drink arriving in the banquet room was also highly desirable. The presence of food tasters and complex assaying protocols added confidence in the safety of the meal. Ceremonial assaying items were often stored on the credenza, which is occasionally featured in illustrations of banquets, as here. The credenza was a usually tiered buffet table from which food or drinks were served, and which also allowed exhibition of the host's spectacular vessels in a display of wealth. And the credenza was also the location where the food and wine were tasted before being served to the guests, the name credenza implying belief and trust. The table was stocked with a variety of testing agents, things like these: Natrunzungenbaum, tree-like pieces of precious coral hung with fossil shark's teeth. Further antidotal materials, often mounted in gold or silver, were worked into vessels, things like unicorn horns, snake's horns, bezoars, coconut, rhino horn, ostrich eggs, all ostentatiously displayed to signal that poison could be both identified and neutralized. And some anti-poisoning or electropharmic materials, especially amber and precious coral, were even added as handles to items of cutlery so as to exploit their protective powers while eating. Inventories indicate that all these types of probi were very common in the collections of the papacy and the nobility, and indeed their treasuries were well stocked with these and similar items. Well, assaying items might have included an emerald. Pietro d'Urbano commended to place an emerald on the table in order to weaken the effects of any poison, or to place it in the mouth to release the patient from its power if they'd accidentally ingested some. Well, you might remember from last month's lecture that the indiscriminate nature of the plague, which affected people of every humoral complexion, led to the linking of poison with disease. And perhaps the earliest statement of this sort comes from the 9th century pseudo-Aristotle, who writes, "Its specific effect is that it helps against deadly poison when taken against injury from creeping worms that bite or sting. If a quantity of emerald this is, equivalent to 8 grains of barley is rubbed off the stone and ingested by those who've drunk poison, before that poison works in them, with God's help, it'll save them from death, and they will not lose their hair and skin." Something from which I imagine they would be profoundly grateful. Slightly later, Moses ben Maimonides included a chapter on emeralds in his great work concerning poisons, and indicated that it acted as a simple antidote against poisoning only when it's juicily green, showing that the color was very important. Also, it needed to be translucent and reduced to a fine powder. In such a condition, 9 grains of it should be taken in cold water or wine, and Avenzoar, the master, said this remedy had been sufficiently proven and admits of no doubt. It serves as an antidote against poisons which are forced out by it through vomiting, the way terra sigillata acts, and serves as a substitute for the latter, forming part of the theory when it's unobtainable. Well, possibly the most famous and fundamental oft-quoted work on poisons was composed by Pietro d'Urbano towards the end of the 13th century. He recorded that, as previously mentioned, if you merely keep an emerald on the table, it was believed to weaken the presence of any poison in the food or drink. But if you hold it in the mouth, it releases the patient from the power of the poison. He also suggested its use in cases of poisoning with very specific toxins. For example, in cases of poisoning with lodestone or magnetite, the emerald should be administered in wine 3 times over a 9-day period. Those suffering from aconite poisoning from monkshood or wolfsbane should take 2 drams of emerald in wine because, and I quote, "they'll die unless they receive the emerald." Those who have the tail end of the deer will be prone to accidents unless they've taken a draught of emerald. The stone was also used to treat those who had been poisoned with the blood of a toad or by the bite of a serpent. Well, before we leave the emerald and its use in cases of poisoning, it's worth pointing out that the perceived properties of different gems were open to conflation and confusion. This can be illustrated by the Alexander romance, a largely fictional account of the life and exploits of Alexander the Great. One manuscript in the British Library has an illustration depicting the battle between Alexander and multi-headed dragons, each with an emerald situated on top of their heads. And this image suggests confusion with another electropharmic stone, the draconites or dragonstone, there on the right, supposedly harvested from the head or the belly of a dragon. So that's poison done. Let's move on to plague. Waves of plague in its bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic forms swept across Europe throughout medieval and Renaissance times. The disease was little understood, and amulets acted as the first line of defense. The Elizabethan pediatrician Thomas Fair, acknowledging that both emerald and sapphire had special efficacy against pestilence and plague, explained that they're stronger if they're borne upon your naked skin, chiefly upon the 4th finger of the left hand, for that great affinity with the heart above all members. So emerald rings with open backs were constructed so that the stone could contact the skin, and they were particularly useful for protection. George Thompson, one of the small number of physicians who remained in London during the time of the Great Plague, recounts a novel use of emerald and sapphire, which were to draw circles about a bubo or carbuncle, and to do it by holding it up to the light and drawing around the outside of the bubo, and the emerald would magnetically extract all the poison out of the body. And this could be absolutely proven because the bubo would turn black, which of course we now know would happen anyway. But this was supposed to be a sign of the fact that the emerald was doing its job properly. Paracelsus, whose marvelously long name is actually Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, wrote several treatises concerning the plague, a disease which he must surely have had first-hand experience. And in these texts, Paracelsus began to integrate his understanding of the plague into his overall medical viewpoint. He emphasized a connection with astrological observations which reveal the interdependence and interactions of the microcosm, that's man, and the macrocosm, the heavens. The astrological dimension to medicine was well established, as this image from Athanasius Kircher indicates. The positions of the stars and the planets were seen as having direct influence both on man and his various organs, and on the different medicinal simples that could be used to treat a range of diseases. Paracelsus, though, developed things much further than the standard model. He suggested that the evil intentions and activities of man so poisoned the heavens that their response was to reflect that poison back onto mankind by star-mediated infection. And in terms of treatment, Paracelsus introduced the idea of Zenexton, defined elsewhere as preservatory amulets against the plague and preservative pomanders against the pest. Clearly, protection and cure against maladies caused by personally directed, astrally mediated power from the heavens would require a fairly specialized means of intervention. And these Zenextons also harnessed astrological power. Oswald Krall, a follower of Paracelsus, provided details for the construction of specialist holders for carrying amuletic cakes produced in accordance with a precise recipe, amongst them emeralds. The holders were to be of steel or gold, decorated with precious stones in the latter case, on which a serpent and a scorpion were to be engraved at astrologically auspicious times. Krall also provided specialist recipes for cakes of material reflecting their astrological thrust. And these contained the first menstrual blood of young girls, white and red arsenic, dittany root, tormentil, pearls, corals, hyacinth, emerald, and crocus, together with 18 carefully sun-dried toads. He advises stopping the nostrils when pulverizing the toads, and also adding musk or amber to the mixture to help diminish the offensive smell. Hanging the Zenexton from the neck by means of a silk cord so that it lay over the heart ensure that it not only preserves from the pestilence, but hinders the body being open to infections and venoms or astral diseases. He explains that the cakes attract the venom from within and externally consume it. And another of Paracelsus' intellectual disciples, Van Helmont, noted that many of the components of contemporary cures for plague might themselves be defiled by receiving seeds of contagion from the macrocosm. So he indicates that a preservative amulet requires that it should be wholly indefilable. Precious stones seem to fit that bill quite well because of their intense colors, their various light-dependent properties, and the fact that they could be used to inscribe to circles, as we've said before, around the buboes to encourage their detoxification. Well, emeralds also entered into quite complex medicines designed to exploit their healing properties and protect and cure against the plague. The French physician, Lazare Rivière from Montpellier, designed a medicine in which emeralds were the focal ingredient. They were pulverized with niter, potassium nitrate that is, and the mixture calcined, that's heated to very high temperature to remove the volatiles, before being dulcified or made more agreeable by adding distilled water. Once spirit of salt was added, the mixture was maintained at high temperature in reverberatory furnaces for 6 days, and a 20-day period was then spent in a hot bath. That's for the mixture, not the person who's making it, and then digesting in a stopped glass vessel for a month, and then followed before the mixture was dissolved in alcohol to produce the essence of emeralds. And he also provided instructions for emerald-based pills. An emerald containing a recipe against the plague appeared in the first edition, 1618, of the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis, helpfully translated from Latin into English by Nicholas Culpeper. It was called the Confectio de Hyacintho, and the mixture contained a range of expensive ingredients, many of which were seen as being antitoxins or items which strengthened the heart and general constitution. At the end of the 17th century, Moses Shara complained that the apothecaries were using substandard and replacement, if not completely fraudulent, substituted materials, especially emeralds, and were basically cutting corners in order to line their own pockets. Well, this raises the question of counterfeit emeralds and whether true stones could be distinguished from them, or therapeutically high-grade specimens confidently identified. Now, I have to say that these things weren't used universally, but they're quite interesting tests to show a true emerald. Albertus Magnus was the son of the Count of Bollstadt in Bavaria, and he joined the Dominican order in the 1200s. He was a popular teacher and highly influential writer, and he reports a test for the wonder-working emerald. If a circle is made with an emerald about a toad, then the stone was set before the toad's eyes. One of two things would happen. Either the stone, if it was a weak one, would be broken by the gaze of the toad, or the toad would burst. It sounds like a rather messy business if the emerald is an authentic one. Without delay, things were arranged as he bade, and after a short lapse of time during which the toad kept its eye unswervingly on the gem, the latter began to crack like a nut, and a portion of it flew from the ring. Then the toad, which had stood immovable hitherto, withdrew as if it had been freed from the influence of the gem. Well, Pietro D'Urbano has a slightly different approach, and he said that the toad's eyes rattled at the presence of the emerald. Slightly later, a treatise by Al-Tifashi in 1243, a traveller and judge from Cairo, said that he hired a man to catch a snake, and I put it in a large basin. I took a piece of wax, stuck it at the end of an arrow, and glued the emerald on it. Then I approached it from the eyes of the snake, which started leaping first at the arrow, moving furiously, trying to get out of the basin. As the emerald neared its eyes, I heard a light noise as if one was killing a nit on its nail, and I saw that the eyes of the snake had bulged considerably, and it roamed perplexed in the basin, not knowing which direction to turn, nor wanted to get out. Most of its movements had become still, and its strength had abandoned it completely. So the emerald was able to still the writhings of the snake. One final one is advertised largely in the various lapidaries that if it's good and genuine, an emerald will not be able to endure sexual intercourse if you happen to wear one of these in flagrante delicto, then it will break. So there's a warning for you. Now, I've looked at a large number of British 17th and 18th century materia medica cabinets, still with their original contents. And it's interesting that only one, the Corbin cabinet in the RPS, contains the contents for smaragdus in their original drawers. And they're actually pieces of coloured quartz, particularly rose quartz and amethystine quartz, which suggests then that often the apothecary's material was not true emerald. Well, the emerald is one of a huge number of different materials credited with anti-epileptic properties, and many early modern texts emphasize the wearing of emerald amulets to protect against disease. Our old friend Hildegard says, when someone tormented by epilepsy falls, put an emerald in his mouth while he's lying prostrate. It'll revive his spirit. After he gets up and takes the stone from his mouth, he should look at it intently and say, just as the breath of the Lord filled the whole earth, so may his grace fill the house of my body, so that it can never be moved. He should do this in the morning for the next 9 days, and he will be cured. He should always have that stone with him and look at it every morning while saying those words, and he will be healed. Well, the prayer was an important part of the healing process so far as Hildegard was concerned. She used it here and elsewhere in her writings as a means of getting the patient to take personal responsibility and become fully invested in promoting a cure by actively engaging in the healing process, by ensuring then that their spiritual state before God was assured and offered no impediment to his working power through the stone. In 1561, Johannes Crato von Kraftheim, while he was in Vienna, serving as personal physician to Ferdinand I, wrote a letter citing the use of emerald as in an anti-epileptic powder. In addition, the recipe contained powdered rock crystal, precious red coral, oriental pearl, all mixed in a solution of dandelion water. Now, the importance of this was it was administered to 2 patients, and he records that although the patients were each delivered from the epileptic seizure, both of them later died. His conclusion was that the rock crystal was unsafe to use, and that the medicinal emerald in common use was either ineffective or fake, and actually consisted of the green mineral praise instead. Well, a rough classification of the types of epilepsy emerged in early modern times based on supposed origins. One of these was an infestation in the patient of intestinal worms. Thomas Willis was a pioneering anatomist, neurologist and psychologist and founder member of the Royal Society, originally coming from a small village of Great Bedwin in Wiltshire. Willis treated a child who was miserably afflicted with convulsions, so much so that he seemed to be dying. He treated him with purging medicines, and when he examined the stools of the patient, he found that they contained 12 large worms. Following the purge, the patient presently grew well, he said, and the purge had apparently both rid the disease of its source, the worms, and consequently made the condition better. So the association with the convulsions suggested that worms caused the epilepsy. Well, William Salmon suggested an emerald-containing recipe specifically to treat worm-induced epilepsy. It contained a mixture of popular anti-epileptic ingredients, in addition to emerald, things like elk hoof, man's skull, pearls, crystals, peony, oak mistletoe, peacock's dung. So that's epilepsy. Now, fluxes. Flux is a medical archaism which refers to any flow or discharge of fluid. Astringents are medicines that produce contraction or constriction of mucous membranes and are sometimes used to target and reduce the discharge of mucus secretions and blood. Early modern writers identified emerald as an astringent. Well, I won't go into a lot of detail about the various medicinal recipes for treatments of fluxes. I'll just mention that Nicholas Culpeper recommended a compound with emerald as the focal ingredient. Calcined emeralds were pulverized and mixed with the juice of bugloss and dried. Then they were mixed with a conserve of marigold flowers and fashioned into pills. And he said it was a particularly good medicine for the treatment of dysentery. Adrian von Minzicht, on the right here, invented the wonderfully named emerald-containing astringent marmalade, which was supposedly effective against every flux imaginable. It contained emerald, of course, but it also treated excessive menstrual bleeding, other types of hemorrhage, piles, catarrhs, and coughs included. And our old friend Paracelsus got into this as well. He proposed the idea that there were 5 ends or entities that influence the health of mankind. There was the influence of the stars, poison, the individually, the spirit, and the will of God. And he advocated the use of these ends tinctures, whose virtues were to rejuvenate and heal the body, as well as restoring man's proper alignment with God and his purposes. He indicated that by taking finely ground emeralds, calcining them in salt, dissolving the mixture and then placing the container in a fire, a solid could be produced called the ends of emerald. This contained the essence of the gem. This could then be used therapeutically to renovate and restore the body to full health, although his advice does seem somewhat drastic. Sufficient of the material was dissolved in wine so the liquid was visibly coloured, and daily drinks of the mixture at dawn then took place, and I quote, "till the nails of your fingers fall off, then the nails on your feet, then your hair and teeth, and then lastly till your skin be dried up. At this point, medications should cease, thankfully, so that all these body parts can renew themselves and regrow. And I quote, the diseases both of the body and the mind will depart away. Anyone who followed this approach, of course, to its logical conclusion must have not only been very sick, but also very disappointed in the end." The emerald is cited as an effective therapeutic agent in a range of conditions which I've loosely associated together here as diseases of the brain. Claims that it strengthens the memory date back to the writings of Albertus Magnus and are commonly repeated, mostly without any further comment in early modern texts. It's a pity that most sources give little further detail concerning the condition of forgetfulness, making it difficult to judge its origin, because of course memory loss can be related to a range of medical conditions. Some disorders of the liver, for example, kidneys or thyroid, head injuries, alcohol abuse, poor diet, brain infection, tumours, and so on, as well as it being part of the normal aging process, dementia, and certain emotional problems. Well, Hannah Woolley began writing books on household management after the death of her husband in 1660. She commends an emerald-containing lavender-based palsy water. Additional ingredients include a long list of herbal simples, powdered, steeped in ethanol, and which, following a 6-week period of digestion in a sealed container, was filtered. The emeralds and some additional ingredients were then added and hung up in a sarsenet bag in the water, being well sewed so that nothing could get out. So it's a bit like an infusion. And her praise for the drink is absolutely effusive, and she gives a long list of conditions for which it was useful: swoonings, weakness of the heart, apoplexy, palsy, bruises, and so on. Giddiness, diseases of the mother, that's the womb, and so on. And she recommends that it's to be taken morning and evening with a half a spoonful of breadcrumbs and sugar. Likewise, vertigo, or the sensation of dizziness, is a symptom associated with numerous medical conditions. Migraines, for example, benign paroxysmal vertigo, labyrinthitis, neuronitis, Meniere's disease, to name a few. The origin of the belief that wearing an emerald, either in a ring or over the heart, could combat the condition is not entirely clear. Several authors provide pharmaceutical recipes, though, for medicines claiming to ease these symptoms. Adrian von Minzig again proposes several recipes to help with the condition. The marmalade for the head this time, for example, and his cephalic confection. They contained emeralds with a range of herbal ingredients and things like amber, coral, pearls, salt of a man's skull, and the stag's heart bone. The ingredients were dissolved in aqua apoplectica, a water of his own invention designed to treat dangerous diseases of the head. Well, a range of other diseases which emerald-containing compounds were used to treat is also quite extensive. So you can see a lot there, including baldness and gout, which I don't have time to go into. I just need to mention another example of conflation. John Johnston, the Polish physician of Scottish heritage, records that it's said to further women's labour tied to the hips and to hinder it laid to the belly. And this control of the process of childbirth is normally ascribed to Etites, the eagle stone. And in fact, when you look at the Hortus Sanitatis of 1491, the image accompanying the text for Smaragdus even has the same images as used for the Etites as the heading for that particular chapter. The idea was that the eagle took this stone to its nest so that its magic powers could ensure that the eggs didn't addle, and therefore it was supposedly very useful for controlling birth. Well, some of the more complicated recipes emerald is found in. The expansion of Islam into the Western Mediterranean stimulated an unprecedented burst in scholarship, and in what's been called the era of translators, extending from the late 7th to the early 11th century, hundreds of Greek texts, including medical treatises by Galen, Dioscorides, and so on, were entered into Arabic. And this acted as a stimulus for the revival of Greek humoral medicine and the creation of many original works, including one from this man, Mesui the Younger, often known as Pseudo-Mesui or Johannes Mesui of Damascus. He died in Cairo in 1015. He's credited with a number of titles translated from the Arabic into Latin towards the close of the 13th century. And the gem electri seems to have originated within this period of intellectual creativity. And Mesui lists the following precious stones in his preparations: sapphires, hyacinths, sards, smaragdus, emeralds that is, garnets, and amber. Also, silver leaf was listed, and the whole lot enjoyed great popularity as a pharmaceutical ingredient from classical times onwards. If an electri was required, the ingredients were blended to form a thick paste by mixing with an equal volume of honey of roses. If you preferred powder, then you added sugar of roses instead. And then the confection was stored, well occluded in fit vessels for future use. Well, did anybody actually use this electri? The first hint dates from the early 14th century. Edward IV, Longshanks, so-called because of his imposing height, modernized the English legal system, and he invaded Wales and then turned his attention northwards, later becoming known as the Hammer of the Scots. By the early part of the 14th century, he was having trouble from the Scots, particularly this gentleman. Edward was taken ill at Winchester in 1306, and his entourage included the royal physician, Master Nicholas de Tingerwijk, who duly sent the king's espicer or apothecary, Richard de Montpellier, to London to collect medicinal ingredients for the treatment of the king. The king rallied, but on July the 6th, 1306, he suffered a renewed attack of dysentery, from which he died the following day. Well, a letter from Johann de Drokensvoort, the keeper of the king's wardrobe, records a long list of apothecarial materials purchased for the royal physician, including materials for an electuary to comfort the king. And the list included coral, garnets, amber, myrrh, emeralds, and many herbal ingredients. The apothecary's bill was £134.16 and 4pence, and that was left unpaid because the king died and couldn't use the materials. The cost of transporting the drugs was £159.11 and 10pence, far more than the national debt, and that as well was not paid, so certain others had to stump the bill for this. Elizabeth Bavaria married Charles VI of France in 1385, and in 1392 her husband had his first attack of insanity and mental illness, probably in the form of schizophrenia. It persisted through the remainder of his life. Indeed, he began his reign as Charles the Well-Beloved. There he is at his coronation, but it concluded as Charles the Mad, where he went bonkers, basically attacking his own forces on the way on a journey. Well, Isabeau was thrust into political life, and she sought a wide range of remedies, both pharmaceutical and supernatural, for her husband. And the royal records for the 30th of July 1420 shows that she purchased oriental pearls, emeralds, rubies, jacinth, and gold from a Parisian merchant, and they were delivered to the royal apothecary for the express purpose of making an electuary to treat the king. William Bullen, the cousin of Anne Boleyn, was a man seemingly haunted by misfortune. He lost all his goods, including the sole manuscript of the forerunner of his massive work, The Bullock of Defence, in a shipwreck while he was moving from Tyneside to London in 1560. In 1570, he burnt his house down with a flaming Yule log, and from then onwards was pursued in the courts over both money matters and a charge of murder. But despite this, Bullen moved in high social circles and attended various members of the local gentry as physician, and he married well. Perhaps this accounts for his employment of a medicinal preparation involving the use of precious stones, the gem electuary, which includes emeralds, of course, and he used this syrup as a wide-ranging cure for physical diseases and states of mind, but also as an acceptable perfume. If you look at this quote here, it says it heals cold diseases of the brain, the heart, the stomach, and the womb. It's a medicine proved against the trembling of the heart, fainting, swooning, weakness of the stomach, pensifines, solitariness. Kings and noblemen have used it for the comfort, and it causes them to be bold, spirited, and the body to smell well and engender to the face a good colour. So you could even use emeralds as an item of makeup. Pietro Mattioli trained as a doctor in Padua, becoming personal physician to Ferdinand II of Austria and the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II. And he famously invented his great antidote against poison and pestilence, supposedly possessing miraculous powers against poisons. The list of ingredients for his antidote comes to almost 150 items, including the gem electuary and emeralds as they're on their own. Virtually every anti-venom preparation known to man was included in the mix, so very little was being left to chance. This shotgun-like approach drew criticism from later authors. Culpeper, while recommending it, makes the comment, if it were stretched out and cut in thongs, it would reach around the world. Whereas William Salmon referred to it as one of the greatest gallimaufreys that I ever saw, a gallimaufrey being a rag bag. But so far we've seen that the gem electuary was used as a cure-all, an antidote to all poisons, and to deal with melancholy. What else was it used for? Well, in 1632, Breuer recommends the use of the gem electuary in a quilt combined with various herbal simples for the treatment of nightmare. From classical times right into the 17th century, this disturbance to sleep was believed to be due to the presence of an incubus sitting on the chest and suffocating the patient. Well, the gem electuary had lots and lots of other applications listed here, as you can see, including the wonderfully named damnable hum. If anybody knows what that is, I would be very grateful to be enlightened. The lapis de Goa was the mid-17th century invention of Gaspar Antonio, a Jesuit lay brother, working as an apothecary in Goa. It was a synthetic stone and produced in response to declining availability of suitable bezoar stones. The original recipe for the stones required sealed pearl, musk, ambergris, red coral, white coral, emeralds, fossil shark's teeth, topaz, terra sigillata, ruby, and so on. Subsequent recipes are similar, but with some ingredients that were difficult to obtain, omitted and replaced. For export purposes, the stones required certification from the Jesuit pharmacies by decree of the House of India. They were sent back and often covered in gold leaf, as you can see here, and stored in special, very ornate containers. It was esteemed as sweat-inducing, mild astringent, and commonly recommended in a wide variety of fevers, including those associated with plague and gout, and also indicated in the treatment of smallpox, measles, fevers, muscle spasms, and as a cardiac tonic. Well, many stones in the Western lapidary tradition were believed to inculcate higher personal qualities, abilities, and character traits. The emerald's no exception. The association of such benefits with emeralds seems to date back to the writings of Albertus Magnus and Pseudo-Albertus, and was sustained through the lapidary tradition. By no means universally promoted, notice of the supposed effect of emerald on the personal qualities of the bearer still survive in early modern texts. It was stated, for example, to eliminate folly and anger, to improve eloquence and speech, encourage kindness and goodness and good manners, stimulate prophecy well held under the tongue, increase worldly riches, increase in fecundity, calm the fears, and even engender a love of study. And in addition, it also calmed tempests. It was believed to be able to protect the bearer as well from enchantment. So, the emerald held a significant place in the materia medica from classical times through the mid-18th century. In spite of its status and the high market demand as a special stone, also sought after for inclusion in items of jewellery and its consequent high price, it seems to have enjoyed an unbroken popularity in the treatment of a wide range of diseases. Stocked in apothecary shops and featuring in materia medica collections, supply to the market seems to have been dominated by material won from Egyptian mines adjacent to the Red Sea up until the 16th century, and the 16th century discovery of rich deposits of emerald by Spanish conquistadors in what's now Colombia represented a new source of supply, especially via gem markets in Spain and Portugal, and thence to Goa. Many of the medicinal uses of emerald have their roots in the magico-medicinal traditions established by Greco-Roman authors in classical times, and medieval authors from both Arabic and Western traditions. The invention of printing drove early modern innovation in many areas of study, making classical and foreign texts more readily available to an increasingly educated clientele, both in Latin and often in vernacular European languages. Many early modern texts repeated observations about the gem and its amuletic use from earlier authors, with occasional conflation and adaptation from the original ideas. Emerald increasingly became incorporated into compound medicines, often with a lexipharmic, near wonder drug importance. There have been several suggestions as to how they might work its therapeutic effect. The intense color, the hardness, the durability of the stones in general suggest they possess special healing characteristics. As exotic substances, they were ascribed special therapeutic powers. The observation that the emerald causes the air above it to reverberate in some way implies the presence of occult or hidden powers and virtues. The biblical association of emeralds with the foundations of the New Jerusalem and the blessed plates of Aaronic priests, plus suggestions that they were washed out of the presence of God in the Garden of Eden, supports the idea that their healing virtues are God-given. Utilization of the residual heat of the sun from the time of their origin to stimulate physiological responses to disease was put forward by Hildegard. God uses celestial bodies as the mediums through which to work medical healing. Therapeutic gems receiving their divine therapeutic powers from the stars, so that their use required both astronomical and astrological understanding. They could be used as testing agents and warning of the presence of poison. And in the case of emerald, this involved the change, usually the loss of color intensity. Balancing the humors, indicating that emeralds are cold in the first degree, and finally, magnetic extraction of virulence and malignity. Well, irrespective of their perceived mode of action, emerald was ascribed various therapeutic properties, including acting as an astringent, an alexipharmic, an exhilarant, and a tonic. And used as an amulet, emerald was believed to be an efficient prophylactic against epilepsy and a variety of fevers and agues, memory loss, poisoning, and to control the process of childbirth. Incorporated with other geological, herbal and zoological simples into compound medicines, the therapeutic value of emerald expanded dramatically. It was used mainly in cordial and elixopharmic medicines, but also specifically in cases of these 30 diseases listed here. And of course, you could test the authenticity of the stone, for which substitutions and fakes were eminently possible. And that included bringing the stone close to a toad, and if the emerald's stronger than the toad will burst, or its eyes will rattle. You could bring the stone close to a snake, and a genuine one causes the eyes of the snake to pop out their sockets, or they would bulge and the animal would become disoriented. So that's a very rapid rundown of the medicinal uses of emerald in history. Thank you very much for your attention, and I should be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that journey through emeralds and just geographically and historically. I found that incredibly fascinating. Your comment about damnable harm has generated a lot of questions and comments in the chat. But yes, if anyone has any questions at all, you can put them in the chat. I mean, Chris, what inspired you to look at emeralds as a topic?
Well, you know, the way when you do research, you read everything you can find out about a subject, and then suddenly one little obscure little piece of information sets you off down a rabbit hole. Well, that was it. I did some work on the gem electric, and I've been working a bit on epileptic treatments, and the emerald appeared, and I thought, oh, I wonder what there is there, and a whole new horizon opened up before me.
Oh, brilliant. So we've got a question for someone called Caroline. How expensive were emeralds? So she's thinking about, they are thinking about imagining Culpeper recommending them. So yeah, did that bring the price up or down at all?
Well, that's quite interesting. I must admit, I haven't checked. I should have done beforehand. There's only a couple of sources that give apothecarial prices for things, so I'm afraid I can't quote it to you offhand. If Colombian emeralds were being recommended, one assumes that they would be extremely expensive, but given that from what I've seen that most apothecarial collections and materia medica collections were substitutes, I imagine it would be much cheaper than they would have hoped.
Okay, so we've got another question from Edward. Thank you for Gemma for talk. Is there any physiochemical basis for a powdered form of emerald or other minerals acting to absorb toxins?
Minerals are more likely to be toxic rather than antitoxic. I'm just trying to think. The various calcium carbonate preparations and copper actually may be able to ameliorate conditions of poisoning of certain types to a certain extent, but these are things that sort of in the realms of current day modern research. The little cakes called terra sigillata, which are basically clays, have a well-established efficacy in terms of poisoning, and it seems to be well founded because modern experiments show that they had antimicrobial properties, and also if they belong to the smectite clays, that's the exploding clays, they can take up water into the crystal lattice, a bit like we used to have as kids, kaolin and morphine to treat jippy tummy.
Brilliant. So we've got a question from Jane. Is there any kind of testimony from people who kind of ingested the emeralds themselves, so the kind of patient side of them, or is that kind of a bit of a hidden aspect that just hasn't really left any written resources, as is quite normal?
I haven't come across any, I have to say, apart from Avanzoa, and I haven't found the original source for that yet, who says that the test that he applied on himself worked. Well, they must have worked because he was able to write about them afterwards. Other than that, I don't know of any, and again, if anybody can put me onto these, that would be fascinating.
Brilliant. We've got another question from Naomi. Do you know anything about emeralds in Vedic healing? If you did mention that in your talk, Naomi does apologise, she was briefly interrupted. So
yeah. No, I didn't mention it. I purposely kept my focus on Western healing traditions. It is used in Vedic healing, and As far as I can work out, all the Vedic healing stems from original texts that were Arabic, so from Al-Tifashi and others. And there are a group of medicines called the Kushtai, in which there are probably 6 or 7 that are emerald containing, which are still used today in modern Vedic practice. And I do remember reading a paper about some Kushtai from the 1970s in Barnsley, I think it was. They were the analysis was of some recipes that were being used in the ethnic population there, and they were comparing the recipes that were actually used compared with the ones that were theoretically used. And for the emerald containing ones, all the emeralds were replaced with their various sources of calcium carbonate, not surprisingly.
And another, all the questions are coming in now. So about the United States, and including any indigenous populations and uses of emeralds, have you found much evidence in that? Well, has your research not taken you across the pond quite yet?
No, I haven't found, I haven't looked all that hard, I must admit, but I haven't seen anything so far from the US. And again, any sources that I could be directed to, I'd be grateful for.
Brilliant. Are there any more questions for the chat at all? If there aren't, Maria, are you talking to us? You're muted. We can't hear you. That's it.
Regarding bezoar stones, there was a study, and it was proved that all those substances brought together, when they were studied, they just had calcite and gold. So in fact, we don't know how it would work alone as a simple. But in those compositions, it's pretty unlikely that it would. We actually don't know. We can maybe think that they would possibly be used as minerals, supplement minerals, as we take currently vitamins and mineral supplements. And that was in fact the only mineral supplement that was available. And in some cases, as calcium carbonate, it was that way that people took it. But otherwise, I think research is still needed on that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maria. And we've just got one last question, if you don't mind, Chris.
Yep.
So there's been a couple of questions about the astral influences contained in emeralds and diseases. So Meredith has asked, was it just that under the influence of the sun with emeralds and contained heats, as you also mentioned, so the kind of astral element to it?
Yes, no, the good place to go to look there is the lapidary of Alfonso X. This is a Castilian lapidary written in the, I think it's about 1340, if I remember rightly, and that includes emerald under a very complicated name beginning with Z that I couldn't possibly pronounce. And there it is established as being under the influence of Taurus. And the lapidary also goes into a bit more detail about the significance of those signs. I have to say that there's very little accessible information written about the astrological dimension of medicine. That's really a topic for somebody with a gift of good, clear communication to unwrap, I think.
Brilliant. Well, I think that just leaves me to thank Chris once again for an absolutely fantastic talk. There is a recording of this lecture has been made and will be made available much later on.